Welcome y bienvenidos to this episode of Love Learning You. This is one of our cultural capacity. And the reason I say cultural capacity is because in our featured voices interviews, we really get to understand the stories, some of the stories. Remember, there's so many layers to people, but we know some of the stories about who we have sitting across the screen from us. So welcome, welcome. First and foremost, thank you to our returning viewers and listeners, as well as our new listeners and viewers. Be sure that you're following, subscribing on your favorite platforms. And we encourage you, if you want to see our guests, because we do sometimes do screen sharing or, reactions, all of that, make sure you're subscribed to @LoveLearningYou on our official Educator Aid YouTube channel. Okay, with no further ado, I'm very excited about my guest today. She is a former principal and teacher. I also tend to think, TRACI, that as teachers in K12 education, we're always teachers. We're just disguised in other roles. So even if you're a superintendent or a principal or a dean or a counselor, I feel like we're all teachers at heart. We're just wearing kind of a different hat and a different role. And I think that's important because public K-12 education systems around the world, and specifically in the United States, where about 50% of our listeners are here on the podcast, we have a lot of division. We have a lot of division sometimes, and teaching is a beautiful art and science, and it's so necessary to the continued support of humanity and the evolution of our children and future generations. We can't get away from it. So how do we come together more and start to uplift each other and say, we're all teachers at heart. We don't need to be, we're going to see the world differently. So that's what I hope you all get to experience. As you know, we've had some incredible guests from education, like Dr. Brent Comer, who's an award-winning superintendent from Southern Indiana. I recently got the pleasure of interviewing Jeff Finellis. He has not only been in K-12 educational leadership, he's a finance expert. I've had some really cool K-12 leaders, and TRACI, Dr. TRACI BLAIZE, is no different. She happens to be somebody I've gotten the chance to be a colleague with and work alongside, learn together over the years. And she has seen a lot in education as well as life. And I'm so excited for her to be here. And whenever you're seeing this viewed and aired, please remember, we always link resources and notes in the episode, the show notes. So anything that we share or anything she might redirect us to, that will be down below or to the side, wherever you're listening. Okay, so I like to introduce how we met. We met because you are actually the superintendent currently, but you actually were the principal for some of my two nephews and one niece. I have other nieces, but that is actually how we originally met, and they loved you. So plain and simple.
Did they love me or my costumes?
So this is the thing. And you have quite the Facebook following in your community, because TRACI does some very, very cool things as far as engaging her student community, her teacher community, as well as the community stakeholders. And you have gone from being an incredible principal who has done very impactful things in your district to now being the superintendent. And I have just loved watching your journey, but that is how I first knew you, was Wonder Woman. So Dr. BLAIZE loves Wonder Woman. That's her I literally greeted her that way. That's her nickname. But you love to collect Wonder Woman stuff. I remember my niece, she just would go on and on about it. So I said, I gotta meet Dr. BLAIZE. But anyways, I just wanted to commend you in those ways. Give you your flowers. That's how we met. But I like to give guests a little bit of flowers before I hand over the mic and say, how would you like to introduce yourself, TRACI? One of the things, there's two things that I want to name. TRACI's ability to just be herself, no matter who she's sitting across from, is quite disarming. And I mean that in the highest compliment, because, and I'm similar. When you are that way, it can really unnerve people. And it's a very classic, like, I am who I say I am. But that can actually be a mirror for people, which I love to talk about those things here on the podcast, but it can actually be a mirror for us, even if we go, they said that really direct, or right, we all communicate differently, but sometimes when people are so much themselves, it can trigger other people to go, oh, she's just so open and honest. So one of the things that I remember was one of our first conversations, I think it came up, but you were very candid about losing your brother and your journey with grief. But I want to tell you that was one of the first things that I really admired about you and noticed. And I said, whew, I hope I can get to that point someday. And not lose it, right? Not burst into tears all the time with some of the things that I've been through in life. And so I wanted to tell you that. And also the other flowers, I just know the hard work and steps. There's always steps to our path for whatever reason that it took to be sitting in the superintendent role right now and be the Dr. TRACI BLAIZE role that you have now. So I just want to celebrate you publicly because I'm a fan of your leadership. So without further ado, Dr. TRACI BLAIZE, how will you introduce yourself?
Well, wow, that was a lot. So
Well, we can stop. We can stop now.
I just kind of want to bask in that for a second. If I always introduce myself as an accidental administrator because I think a lot of times we go into teaching and we think we're always going to be a teacher, right? You don't go into something thinking, well, maybe some people do go in and think about stepping stones. It wasn't something I thought about. Administration wasn't anything that was even really on my radar.
Wow.
And it sort of happened to me accidentally. I was a special ed teacher at Lakeland, and I was on break for the summer. I was in Wyoming visiting family, and my dad started calling me. And I thought, oh, crud, I hope nothing's wrong, because he knows I'm on vacation. And I call him and he says, hey, Lakeland Middle School wants to talk to you, wants to interview you or talk to you about being an assistant principal. And I was like, what? I didn't apply for that.
I'm content. And you were in Wyoming at the time, right? We were
just vacationing there.
Oh, you were
at that time. No. Oh yeah, this is way back. This is way back.
You're just on vacation. Well, I say that because you were also a director of special ed when you spent North Dakota.
No, Wyoming. I was in Wyoming.
Wyoming. Okay.
Yeah. So my story meanders a bit, I guess, but we were out there on vacation when I got this call. And so I come back from vacation and they've made some shifts in the district, and the middle school principal became an assistant superintendent. So the assistant principal moved up, and he and I had interacted in IEP meetings of all things, and that made him think of me for an administrator. So I ended up getting that job with no experience, no classes under my belt. Hadn't been thinking about that at all. So that's why I say I'm an accidental administrator. It sort of just happened to me before I knew what had happened to me.
Then it was too late.
Right? It was. I was sucked in.
Yep.
So I was an assistant middle school principal, I think for 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
And I really wanted to be an elementary principal. By then I had gotten my degree, and I never taught elementary or anything. I just thought that would be cool and fun because little kids are cool. And I really wanted to be the principal at Lima Brighton. That was the dream, the goal job. But Donna McClary was there, and everybody knew she was never going to retire. So we had been visiting Wyoming for several years, and they had an opening. And so I applied both for a middle school job and for an elementary job, and they hired me for the elementary job. So we moved to Wyoming for 10 years. Wow. And then my dad in 2014 got a diagnosis of ALS, and I needed to come home. I spent some time flying back and forth and going to appointments with him, but I needed to come home. So I applied for some jobs and didn't even get a phone call. I don't know if it was because of the Wyoming address. They thought, why would she want to come to Indiana from there? But I gave up, and I said, okay, I'm not going to be able to go back, and I just may have to take some sabbatical time or do something. Yeah. Well, then I was at a workshop in Denver. I was walking along the sidewalk, and my husband called, and he said, Lima Brighton's open. And I went, what? So I reneged on my giving up and put
Mm.
in my application. And lucky for me that Lakeland took me again. I'm like the bad penny that keeps showing up at Lakeland. So they hired me to
You're
be a
meant to
lineman
be
trainer.
there. You're meant to be
Yeah.
where you're at, exactly where
Yeah.
you're at.
A lot of fate involved.
You what?
A lot of fate involved in it, really.
Yes, absolutely. Divine timing.
Mhm.
Okay, so I want to go into our cultural connector questions, and this is just kind of almost like speed dating, but it gives
Okay.
culture some fun ways to learn a little bit, just a small window into kind of our guests' cultural context. So values, some beliefs, norms, but they're fun questions.
All
So
right.
my first question to get to know you and for our audience here is, what is on your bookshelf right now?
Oh, I brought some things to show you. So
Perfect.
professionally
Perfect.
right now,
Yeah, right. I
we
love almost every guest has
just,
categories, and I do the same thing.
yes.
Well, for fun, I'm reading this. For research,
Right.
I'm reading this. I love
Now,
it.
I will say for fun, I am a sucker for historical fiction.
Same. I like that.
So I am a lover of Diana Gabaldon's books.
Oh,
I read her all the time, the
what is
Outlander
what's
series.
he Outlander? So what time
Out,
period?
yeah, so it's falling through the stones into like the Battle of Culloden, so way back in Scotland kind of stuff.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
she falls 200 years through the stones. So she's at World War II and falls back in 200
Oh,
years.
okay.
Oh yeah, it's really
Yeah,
cool.
that sounds like a
It's
ride.
it's a very, very long series. I think they're on book number 8 or 9. Maybe it's 9. We're waiting for it to come out. But they also made a TV series out of it, which is pretty true to the books. But
What's the
it's
TV?
very
What's the TV?
Outlander. It's called
Called
Outlander.
Outlander. Okay, I'll have to
Mhm.
check it out. Okay.
Yep, I think it's on Stars, maybe. I can't
Okay.
remember. I put off watching it for a long, long time because I really love the books. And I was afraid since she hasn't finished the series of books, I didn't want to have other pictures in my head of what the
Yes,
characters look
I do the same thing. Okay.
like. But I finally
Okay.
caved in because it takes her so long to write her books because they are so
Yeah.
well researched and they're so long. So
Ah,
personally, that's what I like to read. But then professionally, we just did a leadership book study on this book called The Three Chairs.
oh,
So
yeah.
it
Heard
talks a
about that
lot
one.
about leadership and how, sometimes you have those imposter feelings, and then you see leaders who come across as very arrogant, but the truth is they're kind of stuck in that imposter. But what you want to do is be in that middle chair where you're calm and you're consistent. And it was just a really good book study, I thought, for our whole team to read after I read it.
Mm,
And so now our leadership has moved on and we are starting a journey into professional learning communities. This isn't the
yeah.
first time Lakeland's gone this direction, but we're going to do it right this time. And so we're starting with the book by Carrie Rosebrock,
Mm-hmm.
Arrows.
Nice.
And yeah, Carrie Rosebrock and Sarah Henry. So that's our latest book study. So those are what I've
Awesome.
immersed myself in lately.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's
Yeah.
usually always a loaded question, and thanks for sharing those recommendations. I believe we're gonna try to make sure that this is going live when it's kind of beginning of the school year. I always
All
like to
right.
feature our superintendent or principal guests in that
Mhm.
kind of July, August, September, as
Yes.
people are returning back to school and stuff. So next question. You have to choose an anthem to walk onto a stage. What is your song that you're choosing, Tracy?
Oh, it is totally the theme from the show Wonder Woman. It
Oh,
just
I
has
should
to
have
be
known.
Wonder Woman. It's the
Yes,
ringtone on my phone.
exactly. So there you go. She already has the anthem. Okay, perfect. It's so funny to me because most people, even if they haven't like reviewed the questions in advance, they know exactly what song they would choose. It's so funny. Okay, next question. We get to transport back in time with you. This is a time
Mm.
travel question. We get to transport back in time with you, to when, little Tracy was sitting at the dinner table. We're transporting back in time. What are we going to eat with you? One of your favorite meals when you were a kid. What are we going to eat with you?
Okay, for my birthday, most of the time what I asked for was my mom's chicken tetrazzini. So I don't know if everybody knows chicken tetrazzini. And I
Tell us,
found out
tell
this
us.
year people make it differently. I didn't know. I thought everybody did it the same, but they do not. So my mom's was always done in the crock pot, and it was, chicken in the broth and spaghetti noodles and peas and lots of mushrooms in it.
Mm.
And then one of my friends made it, and she has cheese in hers. We never put cheese in it, but what a great addition. So, and then
Okay.
I always asked my grandma to make my birthday cake because my dad and I both had February birthdays, and we both had the same favorite cake. So we would get overloaded in the month of February with it, but chocolate cake with butterscotch frosting.
Oh, oh, okay. Well, we're going back in time with you.
Yeah. And my grandma would bring
But
the cake in this metal olive green cake carrier.
uh-huh.
I mean, I can picture it in my head. And when she had to go into assisted living, I flew back from Wyoming and I cleaned out her house for my dad. And my mom came over to help. And I had an absolute meltdown over that olive green cake container because I didn't need it. I couldn't take it back to Wyoming with me, but I just couldn't part with it either. So
It's the
luckily my mom took it.
sentimental. It's the
Yeah.
sentimental part.
Yeah.
Okay, final question from the cultural connectors round here. If you had a quote or a text, scripture, etc., right? A quote though, that really drives and inspires you for your life's journey and path, what would it be and why?
Okay. I have this in Laker red and blue in my office, and it says, "We rise by lifting others."
Mm,
So I always look for the best in all people and to try and bring out the best in all people, whether they're little people or big people.
I
So,
know that to be true about you. That is a spot on, that's a spot on life quote. It really
all
is.
right,
Yeah,
yay.
it is. Um, okay, so let's get into some frequently asked questions. Um, and this is the fill in the blank, right? So it's always in this segment, what are your most frequently asked questions as a, and we've had a lot of different industry experts. That list is continuing to grow as we continue to grow and expand here. Once again, I thank you all, viewers, listeners, followers, etc. Make sure you're subscribed on your favorite platform, and you can catch video on Spotify, but specifically YouTube is the place where you're going to see a lot of the different shorts as well and clips from these interviews with all different types of guests who are doing incredible things. And currently, Dr. Blaise is a superintendent of a K12 public school system. They are considered a rural school district, as many districts are actually, specifically in the Midwest and the middle portions of the United States. We still have a lot of rural areas in the United States. And so I feel like actually there are probably many more superintendents that can probably relate to your responsibilities, Tracy, than, for example, like somebody who is in an LA unified school district. Would you agree with that? Just because, like, so people understand context globally because schools are different globally, but here in the States, there's still a lot of smaller school districts where you only have like 4 or 5 schools.
Right. Right. And we do have pre-K at Lakeland too. Don't
Yes.
forget our littles.
Yes, you do. You have a great pre-K
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
So these
Yeah.
questions are going to revolve through her lens as a superintendent. So these are frequently asked questions that she gets as a superintendent. Well, I would bet one of those questions would be, do you have a minute?
Yes, that would be the number one asked question.
From
Yes.
any person on any given day that happens
Yes.
to walk
Yep.
in. But
Mhm.
we're going to get kind of
Mhm.
more technical because you have a lot of expertise, not only with leading teachers and leading community work, you specifically have a very keen expertise and like a lot of experiences around special education. So keep that in mind because that is part of where she's coming from. And know that you heard part of her journey, different leadership roles as well. So first question, and keeping that in mind, has to do with some more recent research in 2022 about miscommunication in the workplace. And because you know that I'm in the business of wanting to elevate employee voice, and I have a whole bunch of employee engagement surveys that we have at Educator Aid on getting a pulse on culture. I know you're big on that too, and have undergone a lot of initiatives to ensure that you are really listening to the voices of the people who are really leading the way in the school district. And those are the boots on the ground. It's teachers, teachers assistants, special ed assistants, our custodians, our coaches. Every single stakeholder is important in a K-12 school community. So more often than not, the reason I say all of that is because when we do these surveys, and I know this is something for a fact that you've been very intentional about, TRACI, and really examining, how do I use this data then? When I'm really wanting to hear teacher voice in particular, how are we going to respond to this data? I say all that to say on any given survey, it's almost always going to point back to communication or miscommunication. And so this body of research stated from Brosix in 2022, and I believe it's ongoing with that group, is that there are 4 barriers of why people denote miscommunication in the workplace. And those are emotional, perceptual barriers, interpersonal barriers, or cultural. From your lens right now and where you sit, what do you see to be the most prevalent cause in K-12 schools in general of miscommunication? Is it the emotional barriers, the perceptual barriers, how we perceive the world, our interpersonal barriers, or cultural barriers? And there's no right or wrong, by the way. I
Right.
ask that because it's obviously filtered through your own experiences and where that guest is in the world.
Right. And they're so intermixed, your
Yeah, well,
perceptions
yes.
have such an
What,
impact on your emotions and
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. What sticks out to you though? Like a thing that you just consistently see, like, ooh, I
right.
that just in general that we
Mhm.
have to work on.
Right now, I think the biggest barrier is emotional. And I kind of go back to the COVID and everything with that. And because the word that I hear the most from people is overwhelmed. I'm
Mm,
so overwhelmed.
mm.
And when you look at what teaching is, and believe me, I can see why people are overwhelmed. There's a huge amount of work that falls under those umbrellas to be able to teach children. And it's not, I can just get up in the morning and walk into a classroom and open a book and do this. I mean, we have lots of behavioral things going on. So
Yeah.
for me, I think it's mostly emotional barriers, and we need to tell people the why behind everything and show them how it all aligns and comes together.
Yeah. What are some ways, if there are other school leaders, anybody in a school leadership role, and by the way, I think every teacher is also a school leader because you can never
Absolutely.
not lead. There's
Mhm.
always some little eyes watching you. Even if it's not
Absolutely.
your colleagues, might be a little student, like kids really, that's the other pressure maybe, that if you're not
Mhm.
in K-12 education and you're watching this, understand that that's also a lot of pressure that educators carry with them outside of being responsible for the safety and well-being of children that are not our own for a good 8 hours a day or more. On top of that, right, that's where sometimes that comes from. And I know society in general, I've heard people say, okay, all right, and it's always, we all kind of think our sector or our particular industry or whatever that is, we tend to be, myopic when we're in it. And the
That's right.
reality is, these are barriers in every workplace. The
Mhm.
difference is that responsibility, I think, and that pressure of not only are you planning for all of these different learning styles and communication styles and cultures in your classroom, you're also very much liable and responsible for their safety and well-being.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
pressure. And that is
Yes.
where, if we don't, to your point, um, emotionally, if we are not knowing how to regulate ourselves, how to check in with ourselves,
Mhm.
um, that's where that comes from, because we're not releasing that built up pressure and that built up stress. What are some ways that you've tried to curb that in your school district over the past couple of years? Because that has been a huge challenge, is recovering from a global pandemic and all of everything else that has accompanied it in the world?
So we have tried to provide some tools for teachers. So we have employee assistance agreements with local counseling centers so that our employees can get some free visits if they need that. And that's completely anonymous as far as the school goes. They don't call us and say, hey, all they do is tell us this number of employees, this number of sessions. We get a report at the end of the year, just so that we have something to document what we're paying for.
Right.
Because there is a cost to everything, right?
That's right.
And we're also trying to provide some training for our teachers, specifically at the elementary level. We're working with conscious discipline now. And when you start conscious discipline, the focus is really on regulating the adults, not so much the children.
Yeah.
As you go through the training, you start more on the children's side of it, but that adult regulation is so important, and taking the time to unplug. I am a big advocate for my staff unplugging. If you're on vacation, you're on vacation. Use that send later feature as a leader on your email.
And that's the thing when we do, and this isn't true for every part of the globe, but if you are in a part of the world where you have access to technology, oh my goodness, what a privilege. The access to the tools and information to try to even streamline how we organize, it has never been better for teachers. And I will say that is something, it's a learning curve though, because it's so rapid. And when you're in the classroom in particular, I know this as a former K12 teacher, when you're in that classroom though, it is all about focusing on, as you would say, the littles, the little people in front of you, because like that is your focus. So you're often not as privy, right? It's easy for me to sit here. Now I've been an entrepreneur for 7 years. It's easy for me to rattle off, oh, yeah. But I would have had no knowledge of that when I was in the classroom, because I'm thinking about, I'm going to call Johnny's mom, and then I'm going to go to this basketball game, and then I got to grade 500 papers, like it, whatever the thing is, you're not necessarily as privy or up to date on the tools that actually could help you. And that I get excited about, because it is a skill set of mine. And I was talking to TRACI about this before we hit record, but I'm working to put out some really, really low cost stuff, because now I look at some of the systems I use and I go, this would be a game changer for a teacher, like for planning or for whatever. And there's that gap, that skills gap, because you just don't have the energy to try to expand in that way and filter through all of the new stuff. You're wanting to meet the kids where they're at. So I just say that as an aside to really also for other people to consider, whether you're in K12 or not, if you're in a leadership role, listen to what TRACI does. And number one, she leads by example. So if she wasn't setting healthy boundaries and unplugging or spending time in her pool, which I see her post about on Facebook, right? Like she makes it clear to share how she enjoys living. It's not always about the work. And actually, by the way, when you do share about work, it's very much through a joyful and celebration lens, and or your videos in costumes.
Yes.
So, like, tell us a little bit about that though, really quick, before we go to the next question, because I think that this is also a strategy for leaders to keep in mind of, number one, don't take yourself too seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
But also what's behind that? Because I know you in general, you're just a fun animated person. That's part of you and your personality. But I really think that it's a form of employee engagement. And I think a lot more leaders, especially in corporate, they could learn from a lot of things that school leaders do to really pump up like the spirit, so to speak. Where does that come from, and what keeps you fueled with that? Because I mean, it's like people love that. I love to watch your videos.
So I really don't even know where the costume thing started, to be honest with you. But at some point I decided those were fun. But I know that my husband and I started throwing Mardi Gras parties when we were in Wyoming. And so the costumes kind of came about there. And then I carried it over into the school. So really it's because you can't help but laugh at a person who shows up in your doorway of your classroom, on a blow up rooster that looks like they're writing, or dressed as the Queen of Hearts, or handing you a cookie that looks like them as an elf saying, thank you for being a Laker. It just,
You are so
so
creative. So
yeah,
creative.
it just really became a way for me to say thank you in person. That's how I'm using it as a superintendent. So a lot of times for when I was a principal, it was more about the kids getting to see me be silly. I mean, the staff did too, but
Right.
the costumes now in this role have become more of a chance for the staff to see me as a person who likes to have fun. If you asked me for a second quote, it would have been work hard, play hard,
Oh,
because I
yeah.
truly believe in that.
Yeah.
And so that's a way for me to show the play hard side while I'm at work. So every holiday I go around in some kind of costume with the staff and hand out candy to them. Like this time it wasn't much of a costume for Easter, but I had on a big shirt with Bigfoot on it with Easter bunny ears. So,
Works.
that was it for that. At Christmas time, we did Where is Santa's Superintendent? So each morning in my morning announcements, I would show them a picture of me somewhere in the district wearing an elf costume. And so they would send their guess to me as to where I was at, and then I would send them a prize. Usually it's like a Lakeland sticker or something that I've had ordered special. And yeah, so it's really a way to say thank you to them.
That's beautiful. I think that's really important for any leader who's listening to take away from this interview is, and from TRACI's leadership perspective, is how are you thanking and showing gratitude to your team? And that's something that lights her up. She has fun doing it. You have to find your thing. So if you wouldn't normally be that animated, that's okay. But find your thing that can be your form of gratitude to your team, because it does have to be authentically you. It can't be, oh, yeah, I heard this great podcast and now I just dress up all the time. Well, if that isn't you though, then it's not going to be authentic. Is there any other strategies that you feel like leaders could implement in their daily lives to make sure that they're tapping into that thing that is uniquely them and then sharing it? Because I think you do a really good job of sharing who you are as a leader. And that goes a really, really long way to build trust. Um, any other strategies that you would give as far as employee engagement, especially if somebody's sitting there going, okay, well, I'm in finance, I'm a CFO, or I'm a CEO of a financial place, and I'm not going to give out candy. What are any other things that you would say, especially too, because it's important for people to know this, you've helped and been a part of school closures, because just by nature that happened, not because you did that, but like you've had to manage a lot of change over the years. What else helps keep that morale? Because that's really a morale strategy.
I think it's honesty in your communication, and as much as having people see you. So for me, it's video announcements and
Being visible.
yeah. So all the way along with the closure of our school, I was having staff meetings because my school was one of them that was closing. And so I had staff meetings all the way along saying, okay, here's what I'm hearing is the next step. Here's what you're going to be needing to do. Here's how I think this is going to roll out, so that they weren't in the dark. Because when that happened, I mean, the administrators were in the dark. We didn't know either. We were held after a board meeting and told, you're not going to have a job next year, quite possibly, because we're going to close these two schools. We didn't see it coming either. So trying not to ever have that shock to your staff so that they can see the process as things roll out. So
Yeah, absolutely. Oof.
And video announcements, those are something anybody can use. It is so easy to do. And I have a superintendent mentor that I meet with. This is my second year as a superintendent. And so we're still meeting. And she is just awestruck by this, because to her, it's a big deal. To me, the video announcements are nothing. Turn on a camera and I'm going to talk. It's going to be fine. To her, this is amazing. She doesn't think it's sustainable. She can't believe that I'm in the second year doing it. But it's can be really easy. But again, it does depend on the person's personality, and it's not for everybody, but it sure
Yes.
has worked well for me.
I've seen that more and more though, and especially we have tools like Zoom and Loom and all of these ways to streamline. I mean, I do that a lot. I think I use that when I worked with you all some too.
Mhm.
Like I do that with a lot of different colleagues that I get to work with, because it's also easier to watch a 2-minute video or go back to something. I can speed it up if I'm like, okay, hurry up. Like it gives people
Oh,
that
yeah.
flexibility to choose how they want to digest the information, as opposed to a long email that we all know maybe the first couple of sentences get read, unless it's something that is maybe more pertinent to you. So that's also, communication conundrums can become opportunities, is what I think. We just have
Very
to look
true.
at them in that way. All right. So next question that's more technical through your lens and understanding and learning from some of your leadership prowess. When when teachers reach out to you, I'm going to be specific to K12 with this question. So when teachers are reaching out to you or your principals, right, your superintendent, or perhaps even your board, et cetera, when different stakeholders reach out to you, and what are they usually reaching out to you about?
Mm. Recently, it's been about the pictures that used to be in the gym. So
Oh,
we,
tell us about this,
yeah,
because this is again, it's almost like real-time case study. And
right.
these are things that are cultural in nature, right? Culture, remember, is our norms, beliefs, values, symbols, language. That is complex. There's a lot of different pieces that can go into measuring that in some place. We just talked a lot about climate or morale with TRACI. And that, remember, I have a mentor as well, and he just always says, just remember it this way. Culture has a lot of the moving parts. It's ever changing. It's driven by the people and stuff. But remember that climate and morale, you can shift in a second. Cultural change takes often a lot longer to see the impacts of what your inputs have been. But climate and morale, you could go pull the fire alarm. Like you could change the entire tone, the climate and morale of your team, just by, if, for example, I bet money, if you didn't do your announcements, you're going to get emails that say, where's the video announcement?
Mhm.
Because it's become part of the cultural norms. And that is a form of how you've been very intentional with communication. I'm going to remember my original question.
We
What?
were
Oh,
talking
the
about the gym,
outreach.
the
So where
pictures. Yeah.
you're at, we have the situation where you're getting outreach about pictures in your main gymnasium. That's the situation.
Yes. We're
And
doing a gym
tell
remodel.
us the situation, because I'm
Yes.
smiling because this is very common in school
Mhm.
districts as far as
Oh,
change.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it never happens right. Just ask anybody in the public.
Yes.
But so so what happened for us is that we started out remodeling a press box at our football field.
Okay.
And as part of that, we ended up in a whole rebranding thing that we didn't really anticipate it being complete rebranding, but that's what it turned into. We went from double interlocking L's to a single L.
Ooh.
Yeah, so that was a big deal.
But
But
it
then we
shows
moved
how
on.
important symbols are to people.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now it's time to do our gym floor because it's time. It needs to be sanded down. There's some repair that needs to be done. Well, just like a home project, a gym project, one thing leads to another, because you can't have a brand new, beautiful gym floor and your walls look terrible because they need painted and things like that. So one of the things Lakeland had done for forever, I think, when they had sectional or regional winners or outstanding athletes of any sort,
Yep.
they would put a picture of that team or that individual on the wall of the gym, which is great. But they didn't have a consistent way of doing it. So some of the pictures were super big and some were not so big, and they were hard to see from the floor or the bleachers. And some were color, some were black and white, some of that due to time, when they were taken. But some of those pictures did not age very well. And so some of the athletes look neon green at this point, just because of the fading of the pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we took everything down, we painted the gym. So the question of the day is, what are you doing with those pictures? Because those are a very important cultural piece of our
Yep.
athletic history, and they are. So the next phase of our project is to create a Hall of Fame in our grand hallway that leads to the gym. And so we're working on, what format are these pictures going to end up in? And it's still in the air. We're still designing, and that's a costly process. So it may be a while before they're out on display, but I assure you, we are not throwing them away,
They're
which is
here to
apparently what
stay.
people think we're going to do.
They're part of history. They're here to
They
stay. It
are.
just might be displayed a little differently. And that's okay.
Yes.
Things
So
should
we're having them
evolve.
all digitized, which allows them to be fixed. So people
Perfect.
won't look like aliens
Perfect.
anymore. And
Yeah.
we have a kiosk that those will be rotating and playing on. And we would
Great.
like to move to a more interactive board for it so that people can
I bet
choose their decade.
more people will actually, including students, first and foremost, will probably actually stop and look at them more.
Yes.
And even if not, it's more accessible to do so because
Yes.
you pass it more often. Not everybody's in the gym all the time. And
Right.
controversial question.
Uh-huh.
And you can plead the fifth if you need to. I know. So, look, there's a whole framework based on Bowman and Deal, but it's about the 4 frames of leadership. They've had it now specifically recreated for the 4 frames of school leadership, et cetera, but lots of years of research. But one of the frames is political. And that is a part of being a leader, is knowing how to move. But anyways, that's why I said that jokingly, like you can plead the fifth if you need to. but controversial question, but it comes up a lot in the schools that I've worked with too. And I see that elevation, especially because you all have had some different athletic programs that have done pretty well over decades, of the
Yes.
school district. And that's often elevated. My controversial question is, in that same Hall of Fame that's being recreated in even bigger and better and brighter ways, will that also condense and consolidate debate team, choir, the
See, I
art?
don't think that's a controversial question at all.
I
The
didn't think
controversy to me,
you would. Perhaps some of the viewers or listeners who see this, they truly, because I'm saying that bias comes out in almost any K12 district who has any sort of athletic program. And that's okay, right? We are big on sports in America. And I was an athlete, like it's a big deal. And it formulates a lot of great social learning for teenagers. Like it's a powerful thing. And robotics and like all of the different things, culinary arts, like how do we also start to celebrate in those same ways? Because I still see that a lot. And that comes up actually in a lot of my surveys with school districts because I ask very direct and specific questions, how we refine them about what are you experiencing and what are your lived experiences and perceptions, because people need space to get that off their chest. It's anonymous. But it gives you a snapshot of how people are viewing the current culture of the district, or the corporation or whoever I'm working with. But that comes up a lot, and it actually becomes a big debate in our workshops because there's often favoritism shown for athletics. And it is because of how it's viewed in America. I get all that. It's all interrelated, but we're in an era where, there's a lot of happening. So where do you stand with that? And what have you experienced and seen in your years? Maybe not even in your district, but just in general.
Right.
You talk to other superintendents and stuff too.
Yeah. So I really plan to have an academic side to this Hall of Fame too. So, and you have to think about what are the most public facing pieces of schools. It's not really our test scores. I mean, those are out there,
Yeah.
but people have to look for that, and then they have to want and care about that.
And those metrics are constantly changing and very arbitrarily tied to political policies. I'm just saying. Okay.
Yeah, bingo. You are totally correct. But the most public facing pieces of schools are performances, right? So
Yeah.
whether it's a musical performance or an athletic performance, those are the things that people see.
Yeah.
So I would really like to have a wing that is dedicated to fine arts. Right now, we aren't putting things like that up on our walls, and we should be. We have some very, very talented kids. Our debate team hasn't been happening for the last couple of years. I hope that speech and debate makes a comeback at Lakeland, but because I'm
Have,
an
hey,
alum of
you
that
should have
program,
kids, you should have kids sign up. You should have
right?
kids sign up for a debate contest on debating if there should be a debate program or not. I'm sorry, my metacognition just.
It's okay. I understand. But yes, so I think that's an important piece of it too. And I think it needs to be an equivalent representation. Whatever we do with our athletes and athletic teams to honor them, we should be doing the same for our dramatic performers and our band members and, all of
It's
that.
just a commemoration that tells the story. It's not even right, even the team stuff, unless you play like singles tennis or a standalone track thing, for the most part, it's pictures of teams. So even if
Yes.
it, right, like, so I love that creativity that you're bringing to it of, it could just be, it was pictures from the school musical, and there's these great
Mhm.
pictures of the kids performing that year. And then what was the musical that they did? Like, whatever the
Right.
things are. I'm throwing out ideas too, in case you are in K12 and you're looking for ways of, it becomes a big cultural conversation. So you have to be intentional if you're going to change something. And that is what you're bringing to the forefront, is once again, just your experiences with change management. You have to go slow. You have to continuously communicate. You're not going to please everyone, but as
Oh,
long as you keep going back to that why and are considering the voices, I mean, I think those are also two things that I picked up on with what you were sharing, is those are some keys to change management, especially cultural change management, is that consistent and different formats of communicating the same message and making sure that your why is always attached to it. And over time, of course, there might be pushback. There's going to be people, they're seeing it through their own lens. Maybe there's a certain attachment to them, to a certain picture, whatever. But over time, it usually just takes time, right? Any other things you would add to just navigating situations like that? And thank you for letting us go in that direction a little bit, because
sure.
those things come up a lot. And if they're not addressed well, it might seem so basic to some people listening. It can blow up into a lot more of your time and energy than it needs to.
I found it interesting as someone who does focus on communication as much as I do, and I try and put as much out as possible. I find that the more you do that, the more people want. And so they want to know things sooner than you're really ready to tell them, because like I said, this whole Hall of Fame is still in the development process, right? We don't even have the budget to do it yet.
Right.
It'll come with another bond issue. So the plans aren't solidified, but people still want to know. So I have to be able to give enough so that they know their pictures and their memories and that cultural history of our school is safe.
Right.
So a lot of times it's about making people feel like things that they love and that are important to them, you are
Yeah.
keeping safe.
Yeah. They want to know, is she gonna maintain this, or the next
Right.
person, right? Whatever.
Yeah.
Excuse me. What are two bite-sized strategies that, and this is individuals, I'm going to say teachers specifically. So from your purview as a superintendent, and it's going back to the number one problem you named that you hear coming up as an emotional barrier. What are two bite-sized strategies that teachers could implement in their daily lives to better curb overwhelm? Or even the Sunday scaries. If y'all don't know, the Sunday scaries are specifically in teaching. When we let stuff pile up and we realize maybe our daily lesson plans aren't done, maybe we need to get grades in the grade book, and we really wanted to enjoy our weekend, but maybe we were thinking about those things. And then it all piles up and you get a little burst of anxiety on a Sunday evening, because you got to be up at 5 a.m. just to get there in time and put your schedule together, get your objectives on the board. Woo, I'm reliving it, Tracy. I'm reliving it.
You are. You are. Went right back in there, didn't you?
Okay, so 2 bite-sized strategies that you think could make a difference, even just from watching your own district, right? What are 2 bite-sized strategies that could better curb teacher overwhelm?
It doesn't have to be fantastic all the time.
Ooh, wait, thank you. Say it again.
And what I mean by that is it doesn't always have to be the cutest and the biggest and the most amazing experience ever, because there are times where it just has to be nitty-gritty learning.
Yeah.
That's what needs to happen. So I always advise teachers to hammer procedures at the beginning of the year, because that takes the whole load off for the rest of your year.
Yep.
You are going to have to revisit though. And I think sometimes teachers forget that,
Yeah.
every time you have a vacation, you have to reteach your procedures when you come back.
Yeah.
But that saves you time in the long run. Don't
Right.
look at that as wasted time, because it is
The
not.
muscle memory will be there if you do it on the front end. So tip number 1, prioritize student routines and procedures from the very get-go. There's also the conundrum, if you're a teacher hearing or watching this, I do understand that conundrum if you don't maybe have an administrator who does support that, and they maybe have a mindset of like, jump straight into instruction. I don't think most administrators do, but there are some. So work within the confines of that, even if you have to get fancy about how you align them to 21st century learning standards or the soft skills or whatever standards you have in your state that align with workplace readiness. Try to align the blocked out time, because I will tell you, being in school turnaround, we would, at the primary level in particular, and I was responsible for pre-K through 5 when I was a vice principal in Chicago Public Schools, we would spend, and they had permission to do so, but I would have our teachers easily the first 3 to 4 weeks. I should see blocked out time for routines and procedures. They had to submit. Now, again, this was turnaround setting at the time, but they had to submit an entire packet. It was a template, and they wrote out and planned routines and procedures for everything. So when you're in elementary, understand this, if your brain is not K12 or your background is not K12, especially kindergarten through 2nd grade, pre-K through 2nd grade, ages 3 to about 8 or 9 is where I'm target aging, if you don't know grade level wise. But those age ranges, routine and procedure for how to sharpen pencil, routine and procedure for how to line up for bathroom, routine and procedure for how to go to lunch, routine and procedure for how we stack our coats, for blah, 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 blah. You could name off easily minimum 40 routines and procedures that need to be taught. So when we skip that, we also do a disservice with the social emotional learning portion, because that can also be infused through teaching of those routines and procedures. So it doesn't have to be dull. It's engaging the students in that, and okay, I'm going to get real quiet. And when you hear me snap twice, I want you to move, snap. Oh, I only saw 2 people. Oh, now I've got 4. Okay, right? It's all of those moves. Yeah. And so I put that out there because I think if we understood better and could approach it more holistically, instead of saying, why are you spending 20 minutes going to the bathroom? Well, maybe because you have 25 5-year-olds who got ants in their pants. I don't know. So that's a great one. Ooh, that's a solid one. What's the second strategy? Because you're
now I got to come up with a second one.
Yeah, because the overwhelm, a lot of it then comes from all the extra behavior management calls, which again, you can't control if a kid has a rough day. What you can control is what you focus on. And once you have the structure, it becomes so much easier because kids know what's expected of them and it's clear.
Yes. So I think the second piece that I would talk about would be actual lesson planning for teachers, because I think we've kind of moved away from that as we become more veteran in our teaching and we think, I can just walk in and do this. And some things you can, some things you can't.
No.
So keeping that end in mind and planning backwards and what you need to know and recognizing what truly is a learning activity and what isn't. Because a coloring page of color all the things that equal 9 is not necessarily a learning activity, it's a practice.
Yeah.
And you don't want them to practice wrong. So
Yeah.
I think that planning piece is so important.
So routines and procedures, planning and preparation.
Yep.
Essentially, those do go back to self-accountability too. It's also some shared accountability and making sure that we hold ourselves accountable to the little people that we serve every day. Those are our biggest clients, are the little humans in front of us. That's the opinion that really matters most in a K-12 school community. If we're being honest. And sometimes we skip asking that too. So the only thing I would add is just understanding who you are and your patterns with that. I think that would decrease a lot of that overwhelm of, if you know that XYZ brings you stress, then account for that, right? And make sure that it's not reactive. I would also say one of the biggest things that is really tricky, and it was for me too, and I've actually worked a lot on this because I call myself a recovering people pleaser and a recovering workaholic. And those are both tend to be trauma experiences, even if it's just because we are seeking the approval of a principal or something. Like, those things kind of just happen subconsciously if we're not aware of it, especially if you start teaching in your 20s. But the one thing that stands out to me when I hear, because I hear that all the time too, whether I'm talking to teachers, principals, or soups, is the overwhelm. And if we were to get real about who we are and how we function and what's required, and we just told people those things, right? So I'm an advocate of getting to know your colleagues, because they're going to have superpowers that you don't have. And if you have that trust, many hands make the work light. And you don't have to do it on your own. So I think sometimes we also try to be Superwoman, not Wonder Woman, but Superwoman. And yeah, what would you say about that as far as just anything else?
Well, I think what you said is so accurate. We moved into having all of our, say, first grade teachers have prep at the same time so that they would have time to plan together. And what I saw happen is they started playing to each other's strengths. So we had a teacher who was super strong in math, and she kind of took over planning everything for that team for math and handing them, this is the lesson, here are all the copies. Somebody else did that for English language arts, and that is such a bonus. Don't be afraid of that, and trust your colleagues that they want what's best for kids too. Now, then you deliver that in your own way.
Yeah.
I think we
You
get
still have
hung
to
up
review
to,
them. You still have to
oh,
review.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we get hung up on when we talk about using a curriculum with, what's the word I'm looking for? I just lost it. Integrity, basically.
With fidelity.
With fidelity, there's the word, the fidelity word. People think that means that I'm a robot reading from the teacher's manual, and that's not what that is.
No.
Make sure that you're teaching those things that are supposed to be taught, but you can deliver them in your way. So you're right. It's an art and a science when you talk about teaching.
And that also, again, it goes back to knowing yourself and your strengths. So that's also the other thing. Build yourself up and know your worth, so that when you are meeting, you can say, oh, no, you know what? Don't stay quiet. Like, if you see that your colleagues are struggling with something and you have a background in that very thing, but you're still not, like, again, it goes back to also knowing that you bring value to the table. Another thing that goes along with that overwhelm, and I think this applies to any sector, if we're really trying to live in our highest self, so to speak, and in our best ways, give to the world and serve with our gifts and talents, but specifically with teachers, I think there has to be an acceptance that it's never done. And it's a profession that's constantly evolving. I will never forget a story when I first started consulting. with a smaller school district. No, it was not Lakeland, for any Lakeland schools watching. No, it was a different school district, but I will never forget, I was meeting with their instructional leadership team, and it was about 10 teachers that represented all the departments in their high school. And we were looking at something because there was a lot of resistance from that team that they didn't need to change anything with how instruction was going and with the structure of lecturing in the high school, but they had student survey data we were looking at that directly showed probably a good literal, it was like 85% of students are not excited about these different subjects. So I will never forget, there's a teacher who goes, and she was on it. I mean, she was being serious, but to me, like, I think I had to step out of the room, to be honest, because I was like, I couldn't even believe this, but it was also funny. So I'll share it. She goes, this is so inaccurate. And I'm going to tell you why. There is nothing wrong with our stuff. We just did our curriculum maps 15 years ago. She was serious.
My goodness.
She was serious. And I see a lot of teachers, because a lot of us tend to be type A. You can't, or a high D on DISC assessment, whatever the thing is about your personality, meaning we like to be in control of our space, and the classroom we're leading, because the classroom and the school really belong to the kids. But we like to hold a lot of control and be very planned and very structured, and you have to in a school day. That's the art and science of it. Where I see people going wrong, once again, is that thought that you're going to come into something, and once you do a lesson plan on that, yeah, you might have some solid go-to lesson plans because you do this incredible reading circle on this book every year. Wonderful. But you're going to grow and adapt, I would hope, all these supporting activities, the anchor texts that support the core text, all the things around it, because guess what? You have different kids every year. And if we're being responsive to the needs, just like our charge as leaders is to be responsive to the needs of the employees, you have to actually interact and act and be willing to change. So one of the sources I actually think, even in some of my own like PhD research, is culturally, there needs to be a shift in that arena of, if you're like, you have to accept that it's not done. You're not in a profession. That's why you have to get into some stress management strategies, emotional regulation techniques, get your own anxiety under control, because sweeties, you're not going to make it if you keep letting things stack in that way and thinking, oh, well, if I just get this done. No, you might have milestone markers like, oh, I went through this training and now I know Orton Gillingham, right? Or whatever that is. And then you're going to know it. Or I know how to do words their way in my sleep. That's great. And those are core things that might support your kids. But that actually is the source that I see a lot of people why they're actually overwhelmed. Yes. Because you keep thinking that this is going to be so simple if I just have this in place. No, but you're dealing with human beings.
Yeah, there's no arrival. You don't get to arrive and say, I'm done now. That isn't how it works.
You notice that. And how do you think, like, how can we evolve our profession in that way? Because it's something that I struggled with as a teacher. And I had to get to that place where I go, you know what? I'm just going to embrace always creating, because it has to be responsive to my students, which is good. I mean, that was actually a lot of how I have been an entrepreneur for so long now, because I know how to create new strategies and pivot. That flexibility, we've got to work on that, I think, just as a whole, as a profession.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think as leaders, we need to look at how we roll things out, because like when we start talking about curriculum maps, everybody just goes, not again. I don't want to do it.
That's why I gave that example though.
Yes, but we're going through that right now, because everybody who comes on has a different format, a different method, and so I can see why teachers get frustrated and feel like I'm recreating, because they kind of are. So I've really tasked my new director of student and staff success that as she's leading this, that we're not going to keep changing the format on this. Once we get these, this is the format for them. and then we tweak over and over and over.
Yep.
And maybe in 5 years, there might be something we need to add to it because we're told you have to do this.
Correct.
Okay.
Like
But
policy.
let's make it something usable and then use it, because I think that we create a format, then we put it on a shelf, and then 5 years later or 3 years later or whatever, somebody new comes along and says, oh, we're going to do this again because you don't have them. Well, I do. It's just on my shelf. I haven't used it.
Yeah,
So,
I think our newer generations of teachers are going to engage very differently with the teaching and learning process. So it'll be very exciting to see in the coming decades, Generation Z, more of Generation Z. There's already, you know, some in that age range that are in teaching, but that they grew up in a different world. And it'll be really interesting to see, because really, when you think about it, teaching is one of those professions that it is always in the continuous improvement process. And that is, to me, a positive when somebody opts out of teaching, because you really are influencing the trajectory of people's lives. There are things that we all remember that teachers said to us. We impact, even if you're unaware of it some days, you're impacting and influencing. And I know, it's such an important role in society all over the world. And I also think if you self-select and discover early on, please do not stay in the profession. If you're constantly overwhelmed, it shouldn't be that difficult. Now, it's one thing to have if there's trauma happening in your district or in your class, like those are things that are a big deal and you need to pay attention and resolve them. But if you're constantly overwhelmed by even the idea of creating something new, you have to think twice and maybe go and I'm not being facetious, but truly go work at a bank or something, like something that is a more predictable. There are some personalities that, because you're already wanting predictability, you got to be clear with the writing on the wall. Teaching is probably not going to be the best for you, even from a mental health standpoint. And I wish we would spend more time on the front end, really helping, you know, pre-teacher education programs, honestly, identify and help the students, number one, identify, is this really the path you want? And do you really understand what this entails?
right. I think
Because
we're
when we
seeing
get
that a
into it,
lot
right,
now. Yeah,
it's shifting.
with the transition to teaching, you know, with the
Yeah.
teacher shortage that is a real deal, and we have people who have a bachelor's in whatever coming in to be teachers, and they really don't know what that means, and they're stepping into a
Oh,
classroom with no
yeah.
pedagogy, no training. You know, we can give them a week of new teacher induction, but I
Oh,
can't teach you
oh,
everything I know in a
yeah.
week.
Art. Yeah, I mean, talk about an art and science. And that's one of my favorite texts from
Yes.
Marzano, is the art and science of teaching. It's both. It's,
Yes.
um,
You
well,
also talked about how once a teacher, always a teacher. And I think sometimes our teachers forget they're also learners, and that we're
mhm,
always learners too. So I feel like as a superintendent, my audience for teaching is the older audience now. It's the teachers. So a big part of my announcements, I do these little 101 series. And like right now, I'm doing one called Teaching 101, and I'm going through John Hattie's basic strategies that work in a
visible
classroom.
thinking. There we
Yeah,
go. I
because
love
we
it.
forget those
Yeah.
basics.
Yeah.
We try to get so fancy with everything, and really look at what works.
Yeah. Establish your go-tos. It's
Mhm.
part of routines and procedures.
Yep.
What are your go-to strategies? What ones do your kids respond to the most, right? That's what we need to be
Yes.
paying attention to, is when you try something. Same thing if you're in any other industry, we try something new with your employees, for example. Look at how they're responding and give them more of what they like, because that means that's probably lighting up the most sticky learning, for it to actually be retained. As we close out here, Dr. Blaze, this next segment is called Inner Child. And this is, you know, our personality structures are actually formulated in us. All of our tendencies, how we manage conflict, how we process information, see the world, by the age of 8. So our unique personality structure, and we are who we are. So we're going to go back to 8-year-old TRACI, future
Oh
Dr.
my.
Blaze. And I want you to think about, what is a principle that you lived by then, and maybe somebody taught you, or maybe it's just something innately you knew, and you find that as a pattern in your life, but a principle that you lived by then as little TRACI, and still today you go, yeah, I still live by that principle.
Mhm. So my dad was a Detroit Lions fan, so he always said that,
Okay.
he was the fan of the underdog. And and I not
No
necessarily
shade,
in
Detroit, but it's
the
true.
right. So not necessarily with athletics, but I feel like I've always been a champion of the underdog. I've always kind of gravitated towards people that I felt needed a little boost, and they gravitate towards me too. So I
Yep.
do think that's something that I've picked up from little Tracy to now.
Here we go. See, the inner child shines through. She's just wearing a
Right.
different costume.
Yep.
She's still Tracy. Okay, final 5 minutes. We don't usually take 5 minutes total, but unapologetically living out my purpose. What is there anything we should be aware of, Tracy, as far as just things on the lookout with your district to be aware of, like, oh, they're getting on the map about this, things personally that, do you have any writing projects, a contributor on articles, speaking engagements, or anything we should just be aware of that you have coming up? Should we be on the lookout for what Tracy's up to? And then
Well,
we'll link, if you want us to, we'll obviously link, if there's
sure.
Facebook or anything that you want us to link, we'll be sure that that's in the show notes.
Okay. So just the other day, PBS did a little snippet on our new dental program that we started this year for our students. So
Congrats. So am I
yeah, we
able
were
to
pretty
find,
excited.
is there like news or anything on that I can link, or?
Yes, I will have to find
Okay.
the video link for you and I'll send it to you. But we're putting it on Facebook now, so it's out there.
Yay!
But
Well,
yeah,
congratulations to your school community and to you. That is really, really exciting. I know too, you probably won't share this. I'll share it. She keeps getting invited to be a guest speaker on a lot of panels.
I
So
do.
I think you're really good at it. So I
Well,
mean,
thank
from
you.
bantering with you today, I'm basing
Yeah.
it off that. But
It's probably not surprising that
Tracy's like, I'm available for you
my
what?
elementary report cards always said Tracy talks too much or Tracy enjoys the social aspects of school.
Yeah, I know what that means. I know what that means. Chatterbox. No, but that's
Yeah.
I put that out there for people because that if you are looking for a superintendent to inspire or encourage, she is definitely a person that you should be following. Are you on LinkedIn at all? Can
I
people?
am on LinkedIn. Yeah.
I'll make sure that we put your LinkedIn profile too, because I
Great.
know there's a lot of people that could learn from this interview, specifically from K12. So we thank
Awesome.
you for your time. It is a pleasure as always to connect with you, Dr. Tracy. And I just want to tell you all, thank you for showing up for you today. Remember some of these strategies, no matter your sector, but especially teachers. Remember, you're in control of you at the end of the day, and to give yourself a moment to pause, because I know from firsthand experience, most situations aren't as overwhelming as they seem if you break it down a little bit and get real about what's happening. So continue to serve well. We're giving you that charge whenever you see this. And let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Until next time, take care.